Welcome to this week's Sobol Says for Parshas Acharei Mos-Kedoshim. Even though we have a double parsha this week, we will primarily focus on Kedoshim this year, just because that's what I was in the mood for. Next year we can look at Acharei Mos more. Acharei Mos, just in a very brief summary, of course, is quite famous to us because it speaks primarily of the Yom Kippur service. So a lot of it, the avodah that was done on Yom Kippur, so a lot of it is familiar to us from davening on Yom Kippur. It primarily speaks about that, the Shnei Seirim, the two he-goats that were identical. We have much to say about them, just not this year and this week. Kedoshim then, it flows into Kedoshim. Kedoshim is very interesting because that parsha is chock full of mitzvos. They come fast and furious and are certainly too numerous for us to go over in one class. So we're going to briefly list just some of them and concentrate more fully on a couple of them in particular. Of course, the parsha starts out on page 656 in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash. The parsha starts out with the oft commented on exhortation for us to be holy. Daber al kol hadas b'nei Yisrael v'amart aleihem kedoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokeichem. That we should be holy. That's what we'll translate it as, because Hashem is holy. It did occur to me first that this parsha always comes out around the time of Yom HaShoah, either the week before or the week after, and I thought that was notable because those that perished in the Holocaust are referred to as the Kedoshim, the holy ones. And besides this being a command to us to be holy, it is clearly prophetic words of the Torah as well, Kedoshim Tihiyu, that at some point we would be Kedoshim, predicting that which would happen to us some 70 years ago, 75 years ago, and that is, as I've heard from some great rabbis who themselves were survivors, that was the final price for us to pay before Mashiach comes. And may that be the end of our suffering. But in the more traditional sense, Kedoshim, of course, is telling us to be holy. Now, it's unusual the way it is set up here, in that, contrary to the way most of the Torah was given, the way it normally worked was Hashem would tell it to Moshe. Moshe would then tell it over to Aaron. Then Moshe, in front of Aaron, would tell it over to Aaron's sons. And then with them in the audience as well, Moshe would give it over to the Zekanim, and then finally to all of Bnei Yisrael. In this parsha, however, it is different. It starts out, Daber el kol hadas b'nei Yisrael, that you should speak to the entire assembly of Bnei Yisrael. So he was given over directly to all of Bnei Yisrael without these multiple teachings beforehand. And one of the reasons for this unusual setup could be that since one could easily make the mistake that in order to be holy, kadosh, we must separate ourselves from society. Now, that would be a legitimate basis, first and foremost, because kadosh, being translated as holy, is not precise. Kadosh really means separate, separated from. When you are Mekadesh a woman, when a man is Mekadesh a woman, it means he sets her aside, he separates her from the rest of the world. She becomes his as opposed to anybody else's in the world. When something is Hekdesh, it is set aside to be given to the Beis HaMikdash. So Hekdesh, Kadosh, really comes from the word separate. We use it in the sense of holiness. So one could easily make the mistake that the way to attain true holiness would be to separate yourself from society. And frankly, many religions do believe that. The monks, they live a very reclusive life. They do not interact with people. In other religions, the holiest men separate themselves from society. Not so in Judaism. As a matter of fact, it's just the opposite. Moshe is told to convey this to everyone assembled together to indicate that the holiness we must seek has to be in the context of being integrated in society. You are not holy if you are off to the side somewhere doing holy things, but not in any way contributing to society, to the Jewish people. That would not be the holiness that Hashem seeks from us. And this is especially so in light of the fact that most of the mitzvahs contained in this parsha are interpersonal in nature. And again, because, as is a theme we've often said, your religiosity, your holiness, your greatness as a Jew is no different in shul than it is at work and anywhere else in society. We are required at all times and in all circumstances to be holy in that sense, to make a Kiddush Hashem, to show people that we are honest, upstanding, as well as religious people. Many of the Mefarshim, however, tell us that due to the fact that there are so many mitzvos contained in this parsha, and such fundamental and foundational ones, that it was particularly important for everybody to be gathered at once to all receive them together at the same time. Even more amazingly, the Medrash Vayikra Rabbah tells us that the Aseres HaDibros are all contained within this parsha. And that is why everyone had to be present. So I thought we could take a few moments, we'll just do this very quickly, and look at that fact. And here we will once again take advantage of the newfangled creation in the Stone Chumash of having two bookmarks. So if we want to keep our place here in Kedoshim, and we will turn to page 406, which is Parshas Parshas Yisro, which of course contains the Aseres HaDibros. Now it is very interesting because keep your hand over there and keep it back in our Parsha, and we're going to see something really cool. So we know, of course, turning to Yisro, the first of the Aseres HaDibros is Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am Hashem, your God. Now if you turn to page 656, the second pasuk, what does it say? So those are parallel. Next one, back to Yisro. What is the next of the Aseres HaDibros? Lo yeh lecha elokim acherim al panai. You can say Elohim acherim al panai. You may not have other gods. Turning back to Kedoshim, Pasuk 4, Al tifnu el ha'elulim velohei basecha. Do not turn to idols and other gods. We're 2 for 2. Third is, let's see, the third one is Lo sisa Hashem Elokecha lashav, Pasuk 7 in Yisro, page 408. Lo sisa Hashem Elokecha lashav, you shall not take the name of Hashem in vain. And then if you turn back to our pasuk, our parsha, page 658, pasuk 12, Lo sishavu b'shmi lasheker, and you shall not falsely swear by my name. Again, 3 for 3. The next one, pasuk 8 in Yisro, page 410, pasuk 8, Zochores Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. Turn back to our parsha, pasuk 3. The Es Shabsosai Tishmaru. You shall keep my Shabbos. Again. Next one in Yisro, pasuk 12, which is page 410. Kabedes Avicha V'Asimecha. Turning back to our parsha, again that same pasuk we just referenced, number 3. Ishi Mo V'Aviv Tiro. Your mother and your father shall you revere. Next one. In Yisro, pasuk 13, Lo Sirsach, do not kill. Coming back to our parsha, let's see, page 660, pasuk let's call it Pasuk 16. It says, Lo seilech rochil banecha, lo sa'amod al dam reyecha. You shall not stand by as your fellow's blood is spilled. Again, a reference to murder. Coming back to Yisro, Pasuk 13, it's all in the same Pasuk here. Lo sinach, you cannot commit adultery. Turning to our Parsha, here you have to flip a little further. Page 668. Pasuk 10, the ish asher yinaf eshes ish asher yinaf eshes re'elu mos yumas. A man who commits adultery with a man's wife, who commits adultery with his fellow's wife, he's put to death. Let's go 9 for 9 now. In Yisro, Pasuk 13, that's on page 410, again the same Pasuk, lo signov, you shall not steal. Coming back to our Parsha, on page 658, Pasuk 11, Lo signovu, you shall not steal. Number 9, in Yisro, again that same Pasuk, Lo sa'naburecha eid shaker, you shall not bear false testimony against your fellow. And here in our Parsha, page 660, Pasuk 16, Lo seilech rachil ba'amecha, you shall not be a gossip monger among your people. In other words, you may not say false things about them. And finally, in Yisro, Pasuk 14, page 412, Lo sachmod beis re'echa, you shall not covet the house of your neighbor. And they tell us the parallel one to that on page 660, Pasuk 18, V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, you shall love your fellow as yourself. You should not covet any of his. So it's very cool. We literally have a reference to every one of the Aseres HaDibros in this Parsha. So we see here that there was a parallel giving of the Aseres HaDibros in this Parsha. And that was critical to be done. Because, as the Me'am Loaz tells us, one of the issues with the Aseres HaDibros that are given in Parshas Yisro are that they are in the second person singular. Okay? It says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am your God. That second person singular. The problem is, with that, there's room for error, because we could have assumed that that was only told to Moshe. Only Moshe received the Aseres HaDibros, because they are given in the singular. And as a matter of fact, the Medrash tells us that when the Jews sinned by the Chet HaEgel, by the golden calf, Moshe used that as a defense. He said to Hashem, what do you want? They thought you were talking to me. They didn't know all these commandments were for them. They thought it was to me. And he is partially successful in that defense. Nonetheless, I guess now there's no more room for error once we get it in this week's Parsha. And now, in fact, it's given in the plural. And now, in fact, we no longer have any defenses to their violations. And also, another thing to note about the difference, as Rashi points out, and as we've spoken about before, the order of the subjects of one of the commandments is reversed. In the Aseres HaDibros, it states, Kabed es avicha v'esimecha, that you should honor your father and your mother. Whereas here, we're in Pasuk 3, on page 656, it says, Ish imo v'aviv tira'u. A man, his mother, and his father he shall fear. So we see they reverse the order. When it's kabed es avicha v'esimecha. When it's yira, it's ish imo v'aviv tira'u. So they switch the order. Says Rashi on that, why do they switch? Imo v'aviv tira'u. Here, the Torah puts the mother before the father. So Rashi is telling us, very interesting. When it comes to kabed es avicha v'esimecha, he says traditionally a child is more inclined to love their mother, to honor their mother, and therefore the Torah says honor your father first. But when it comes to yira, when it comes to fear, a child's inclination is to fear their father first, more. Therefore, the Torah says, Ish imo va'aviv tira'u. In other words, the Torah tells us exactly opposite of what our instinct would be. We are going to return into this topic a little bit later. So now back to the overview. We'll just hit you with some of the mitzvos. In addition to the ones just listed, the parsha also discusses pigul. Pigul is basically something you wouldn't know about unless you study the Karbanos and the Beis Hamikdash. This was an instance when the Kohen would have in mind to offer the carbon either at the wrong time or in the wrong place, thereby invalidating the carbon, and it is a sin for the Kohen to do that. It also tells us about dealing in business agriculturally. It talks about leket and peah, the different parts of the field that you need to leave for poor people, and it talks about business in general, such as paying wages and generally dealing with people in business. And then there are a lot of ways how not to act, including telling us not to go in the ways of Ov and Yidoni, two of the cult-like avodah zaras around at the time. It tells us we may not take revenge against a fellow Jew. We may not bear grudges against a fellow Jew. That topic we're going to return to in a bit. You're not allowed to hate your brother in his heart. Then it tells us, Mibnei Seva Takum. Mibnei Seva Takum means that you, before an older person, you must stand. This is the requirement that we have to stand before a Talmid Chacham, your Rebbe, your parent, and anyone over the age of 70, even if they're an ignoramus, you are required to stand before them, as long as they're not a Rasha. If they are literally determined to be a wicked person, you need not stand for them, but otherwise you must respect your elders. But the Zohar famously tells us a great play on words with this pasuk, Mibnei Seva Takum. The Zohar tells us, Mibnei Seva, before you get old, Takum, arise, stand up, write your course. Because what happens, it's telling us, if you're going to wait until you're older, till you get it together, to start learning, to start acting properly, it's never going to happen. And more so, if you're going to wait until you're older, and who even has the temptations to sin, as the body gets older, as the mind gets older, it's not even the temptation. So to not sin at that age is not the trick. The trick is to do it when you're younger, when you have those challenges and you can overcome them. That is the goal. And therefore, Mibnei Seva, before you get old, Takum, arise. It also tells us about proper weights and measures. It talks about all the arayos, all the forbidden relationships and their punishments. And then it wraps up with holiness again and how we will be Hashem's chosen ones. And that we should be separate. And let's turn to the end of the Parsha for a moment. Just look at that briefly. Turn to page 670, Pasuk 26. There it tells us, V'hisem li Kedoshim, ki kadosh ani Hashem, v'avdel eschem min ha'amim liyos li. You shall be holy for me, for I Hashem am holy, and I have separated you from the other peoples to be mine. Very interesting. They bring down actually in the notes here in the art scroll what that pasuk is saying. So it says, Rav Chaim of Volozhin used to comment that if Jews sanctify themselves, meaning if we make ourselves holy, if we dedicate ourselves to the proper path, then as the verse guarantees, Hashem will separate us from the nations to be His. And what will happen if we do not sanctify ourselves? Then the nations will separate us from their midst, for persecution and expulsion. And then it goes on to tell a story about a Jew who had become very friendly with his non-Jewish Russian landlord, and he had a friendly relationship, and at one point the landlord started to turn on him and persecute him, and he complained to his Rebbe why that was happening, and his Rebbe said, you should have maintained the distance between yourself and your landlord. You are a Jew and you have the responsibility of being holy. You wanted to be like him, so now he is separating himself from you. Sadly, once again, that is another reference to the Holocaust that this comes out now for all the Jews that assimilated and tried to integrate. Ultimately, the Nazis ended up reminding them that in fact they were Jewish and separating them from the rest of the populace. But there's another interesting thing. It's basically telling us that if we don't separate ourselves from the other nations, and that does not necessarily mean physically, but rather the way they act, from not getting too integrated in those ways and having them influence us, then ultimately, if we don't do that, we'll be forced to physically separate from them. In other words, if we are not spiritually separate, then ultimately we'll be forced to be physically separate. And I thought it was very interesting. A few months ago there was an article, and it says, PM Netanyahu plans to fence in all of Israel. And the article says that they say the question is whether one should cry or perhaps breathe a sigh of relief with the announcement by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who exclaimed he plans to fence in the entire country. He told the press while visiting an area of the Jordanian border, the entire nation must be fenced in to protect Israel from predators. So we see, because we are not separating ourselves spiritually enough, in the end run, we are forced to separate ourselves physically, as shown by the fact we need to build a fence around the entire country to separate ourselves from those around us. So coming back to the Rashi we pointed out earlier regarding the switch in the order of the mother and father, right? It said Kabed es avicha v'simecha in Parshas Yisro. In this parsha it says Ish imo v'aviv tira'u. So Rashi noted that the Torah switched the order because each command addresses the opposite way of human nature. And this is a very foundational concept in the Torah. The idea that we very often must overcome our weaknesses. That is the whole goal of the Torah, for us to refine ourselves, refine our characters. And the way we do it is by confronting our weaknesses, not confronting our strengths. There's a story told about the Sanzer Rav. The Sanzer Rav, the Divrei Chaim, he was very famous for his philanthropy. He was not a man of particular means, but he was known, the story is told, that he never went to sleep at night until all the money from his house was gone. He could not sleep unless he had given away all the money to poor people, a level not only we cannot achieve, but one we should not even strive for. But nonetheless, he was extremely holy and a great philanthropist. And there's a story told about him and Reb David Melech, who was the son of the Bnei Yisachar, the Hasidic master and commentator on the Torah. This story is a very clever use of a pasuk in this week's parsha, which we will go over, but it's the aside, it's the PS to the story that is what we'll concentrate on. So the story is told that a man came to the Sanzer Rav, the Divrei Chaim, to get money for his daughter's wedding. He needed money. His daughter was getting married. And the Divrei Chaim gave him what he could, and then he directed him to go to Rabbi Melech, who was in the next town. And the man came to Rav Melech, who gave him very generously. And the man then goes around the rest of the towns. He collects all the money he needs for the wedding. And on his way back home, he decides he wants to stop off again in Sanz to thank the Sanzer Rav for helping him out. And the Sanzer asked him, how much money had Reb David Melech given him? And when the man told him, the Sanzer exclaimed, really? I would have thought he would have given more generously. So word got back to Rav David, who was obviously hurt by that. And he said, quoting a pasuk in this week's parsha, if you turn to page 660, pasuk 17, the Torah exhorts us, Lo sisna es achicha b'levavecha. You should not hate your brother in your heart. Okay, now that means you should not walk around not just bearing a grudge, but generally having that hatred in your heart when you see somebody or you know it's not healthy for you and you may not do that. So he said, giving it a Hasidic twist, that being that sometimes the bays does not mean in, this means do not hate him in your heart. He says the bays is with. He said do not hate him with your heart. That means, he said, that one should not criticize and be judgmental of others on the basis of one's own good heart. Everyone has areas in which they excel. Is it my fault I was not blessed with the generous heart of the Divrei Chaim? Now, that's a great lesson he is teaching us there. We'll continue the story and then we'll come back to that. When this comment made its way back to the Sanzer, he said, that is a beautiful explanation of the pasuk. But in my case, it's not true. I am not naturally generous. To the contrary, I am by nature stingy. I grappled with this for many, many years until I completely overcame my lack of generosity. All the same, the point is well taken. So Rav Eliyahu Hoffman brings this story to teach us that we must not judge others based on our own strengths. While we may excel in certain areas, we are weak in others. Some excel in Torah study, some in chesed, some in prayer, some in tzedakah. Everyone has their strengths. What we should not do is, yeah, great, you know what you're great at? You're great at coming on time to Minyan every morning. So what's going to happen? Each guy that walks in more than 5 minutes later goes, that guy is lazy. Yeah, okay, great. That's because that happens to be your strength. Meanwhile, that guy can run circles around you. That guy gives 100-fold of what you give to tzedakah. That guy has another strength. We tend to what? We judge with whatever our strength is. That's what we look at other people and say, they're nowhere near me. I'm a tzaddik. They're nothing. But that's what he's saying. Don't judge people from areas that are strong for you, because they'll always fail according to you, and that's not the way we do it. We should consider that there are areas that we are quite weak. And as I've said before, Will Rogers once said, we are all ignorant, just in different areas. And that is really something to bear in mind. However, to me, the lesson comes from the fact, not that story. The lesson comes from the fact that the Sanzer had a weakness in which he specifically worked on in order to make it a strength. And that's what these psukim are telling us, to work on it. And that's the lesson that the Torah is giving us by switching the order of who gets honored and feared first, so that we work to break our natural instinct and turn it into a strength. So I remember a number of years ago, I took my family on a Costa Rica cruise one winter vacation. And because I tend to be very busy, I cherish my vacations with my family dearly. And I was very specific with my wife when making the reservations. Tell them, because some of these places have what we could call a Catskills style dining room, and therefore they may lump multiple families together in a single large table. I told my wife, we're going to be here for a week. I intend to spend my time exclusively with my family, and therefore I need you to insist that we get our own table just for our family. And I reminded her a few times, and sure enough, of course, she did that. She insisted. We get on the ship, and that's like the first thing. That's all I'm thinking about. We get on there. Within a few minutes, I said, let's go to the dining room. Let's find the maitre d'. Let's make sure we have our own table just for our family. They assured me. I followed up a couple of times, and sure enough, it happened. So, the first couple of days, it's just us sitting at the table, and we noticed the table maybe 10 feet away from us. There aren't that many tables in the whole dining room, say 25 tables, 30 tables. And we noticed a table not far from us, and it's a single woman, and she's just sitting there eating her meal. So it was a Wednesday, Thursday, whatever it was, so we didn't think anything of it. We took note. Shabbos comes, and everybody is coming to their tables. And I guess she had also requested a single table. In the end, most families had their own table. And you could see everybody felt a little funny, because she's sitting alone for Shabbos. That just doesn't feel right. And I'm watching, and I'm thinking, oh man, should I invite her? I really should invite her. I'm thinking. Meanwhile, a bunch of people beat me to it. A number of different tables. Somebody would come over. Oh, please, would you like to sit with us? No, she says no. Everybody she says no to. I said to myself, okay, you know what? I'm going to offer her. Now, I probably did not have the best intentions in mind, right? Because now that I see a few people asked and failed, I felt, you know what, I should ask her to be Yotzei, but really, I didn't expect she would say yes. And wouldn't you know it, she said yes to us. She said yes to us. Other people, fine people, great people, offering her, come sit with us at our table. No, 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 no. I asked her. She didn't even say no once. She said, oh, okay, sure. And I was like, are you kidding me? So I'd like to think it was because we were the most sincere. But more likely the reason why is because that's exactly what I needed. I needed to have her say yes. I needed to have her come sit at our table. Why? Because that was a weakness of mine. That was a weakness of my character that Hashem wanted me to overcome, to refine. And therefore, Hashem will set up that situation for you to make you overcome that weakness. And that's precisely why she said no to everyone else and yes to me, because that was a customized opportunity for me. Because I wanted to be alone with my family when I should have been thinking of the fact somebody else may need to sit with someone. Therefore, Hashem made that an opportunity for me, and she sat with us. And she was actually a very lovely lady, and we had a very nice time. But the idea is I needed to meet that challenge and overcome that challenge. And that's precisely what the Torah is there for us. In the areas that we are weakest, that's where it wants us to address them. That's where it wants us to overcome our natural instinct, if our natural instinct is not one that's in lockstep with the Torah. If your instinct is to fear your father, then it mentions your mother first. If it's to honor your mother, then it writes your father first. And for so long as you don't get that message, for so long as you don't overcome that instinct, then the challenges will keep on coming and coming and coming until you do. So I thought for the remainder of our time, we would focus on the following disparate concepts. See if we can tie them into a flowing thread and theme, and use them as an intro to some other ideas. So this is our list of topics we are going to discuss. The first is the Shifcha Charufa, the designated maidservant. We're going to explain who she is in a minute. She appears in our Parsha. The second is V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. The third is not bearing a grudge. The fourth is the death of the singer Prince. The fifth is Yom Ha'atzmaut. And the sixth is the Torah describing the forbidden relationship of a man and his sister as a chesed, which we will look into as well. Now, I dare you to turn off the video right now. I would love to see that happen. If that's not an intriguing combination, then I don't know what is. I'm assuming never in the history of the world has that list been compiled. So let's begin very briefly with the Shifcha Charufa. If you turn to page 662, Pasuk 20, in a nutshell, the Shifcha Charufa, who is called the designated maidservant. This is the basic situation. So the way it works is a non-Jewish maidservant, a non-Jewish female slave. So the way all non-Jewish slaves work in the Torah, that when they are freed, not only do they become free, but they are automatically converted to Judaism. They do have to go through the process, but that has to happen. That's the way it works. Now, Shifcha Charufa is a very strange scenario. That describes a slave woman who is owned by partners. One decides to set her free, and one does not. So she is essentially half free and half slave. The problem for her is as follows. The way it generally works, a non-Jewish maidservant, the owner has the right to match her up either with another non-Jewish slave or even with a Jewish slave. As we spoke about a number of weeks ago, under certain circumstances, if he was married, a Jewish slave, if he was married, he could be paired up with a non-Jewish slave woman, and the children become the property of the owner. In this instance, she has a problem, Because she's half free and half slave. So she may not be with a non-Jewish slave because half of her is like kind of Jewish now because it's free. She cannot be with a Jewish slave because, for the same reason, she's half Jewish. She cannot be with a non-Jew because she's half Jewish. She can't be with a free Jew because she's half slave. She is in no man's land. That is literally the worst scenario you can be in. Now you should know, the Gemara tells us ultimately they try to force the other owner to set her free so she can be fully free, convert to Judaism. But this status exists. Now the Torah is talking about what happens if she then marries someone, whether she was allowed to or not. She now marries someone, and then a Jewish man cohabits with her. Now, this is not classic adultery, because she doesn't have the full status of a married woman, because she's half Jewish but she's half non-Jewish, she's half free but she's half slave, so he doesn't get the death penalty. Instead, so he has to bring a guilt offering, etc. She gets malkos. She gets lashes. Malkos being the most common form of corporal punishment in the Torah. Lashes, which we're going to go into in a minute. So now, she is in this messed up scenario. Now, I'm assuming nowadays there would be a special bathroom for shifcha charufas, or perhaps she would be entitled to go to any bathroom because she's questioning, am I free? Am I a slave? She's certainly transitioning from a slave woman to a free woman. I don't know. But in any event, the thing to note is that the Gemara learns all the halachas of malkos, of lashes, from the case of the shifcha charufa. How strange. Malkos are the most common form of punishment administered by Beis Din, okay? Then much more so than the death penalty, it says in the Gemara. And that is, if a Sanhedrin put a person once in 70 years to death, it was called a bloody court. The most common form was lashes. And there are so many averos that makes one eligible to receive malkos. Why, out of all cases, would the Gemara choose the case of the shivcha charufa, which I assure you was the rarest of all cases, which would happen almost never, because who's even going to contemplate a scenario like that? Why does it choose to learn the halachas from malkos from the shivcha charufa? So first we need to understand how malkos work. As the Chachamim tell us, there is a maximum of 39 lashes that could be administered. They always have to be given in sets of 3. 39 is the maximum. However, the court does not just give 39 to anybody. It gives only to some, it figures out how many a person can sustain without it killing them, essentially, and it gives them, whatever, one less than that, or that amount, the maximum. But contrary to what most people think, they wouldn't look at her and say, hey, you know what, she looks like she could take 21 lashes. No. Each time, after they would administer a lash, they would then check on the person to make sure they were okay, and then do the next lash. The Beis Din was so sensitive and so careful, even though it's a person that may have done a very bad sin. Nonetheless, they were very careful not to harm people beyond what was required. They're very sensitive. So the Talmud Rebbe says the reason why we learn it from the Shivcha Charufa is because could there be anyone lower on the social rung than the Shivcha Charufa? I mean, she's literally in no man's land. She has nobody to stand up for her. She is basically the lowest in society. So the Torah specifically teaches us principles of sensitivity and care for individuals who may otherwise be ignored by society, to teach us how careful we must be with the feelings and overall welfare of every person and Jew, regardless of their standing in society. And while we may take that as a given nowadays, that was certainly not the case thousands of years ago. Which brings us to the famous exhortation of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. We spoke about it last week, and we're going to touch on it again this week, especially the challenge of such a thing and how it's possible to fulfill a command like that, literally, to love someone as much as yourself. It's simply impossible. So the Gemara in Shabbos discusses a series of stories with Rebbe Akiva, whose mantra, as we know, was V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and it is clear from those stories, as well as the many Mefarshim who speak about them, that the mitzvah is fulfilled through the concept of Hevedon es kol ha'adam l'chaf zchus, that you must give every person the benefit of the doubt. Don't pass judgment when you see them acting in a certain way. Only assume the best. So the Baal Shem Tov notes something interesting in that phrase. It says, Heve kol ha'adam l'chav zchus. Heve don es kol ha'adam l'chav zchus, which we translate as kol ha'adam, every man. But really, it then should say, have they done as kol adam? Why kol ha'adam, all the man? It should be all man. The Besh tells us, the Baal Shem Tov tells us, that you must judge the entire person, kol ha'adam. Look at the totality of his circumstances. Understand the context in which he is acting, and realize that his circumstances are not necessarily your circumstances, and that if you are in the same situation, you may end up doing the same thing. And that is why, of course, we don't speak Lashon Hara, because by doing so, we've already sentenced the person to death. We have judged them, we have ruled as judge and jury that they have done something wrong. And once we've done that, we take away the scary thing about Lashon Hara. Is that by us speaking Lashon Hara, normally the heavenly court, when a person sins, looks for every way possible to defend that sin. Mitigating circumstances, looking at the totality of his circumstances. But once we speak Lashon Hara, we take away their ability to defend the person. We've already passed the judgment. It's finished. At that point, they can't defend him anymore. That's the scary thing about Lashon Hara. And I wanted to suggest, based on the Baal Shem Tov, and continuing our theme from last week, that is why we say V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that you should love your fellow as yourself. What do we do with ourselves? We always look at the totality of our circumstances when rationalizing our own behavior. What did you expect from me, God? You made me so tired, and therefore I was irritable. You don't give me enough money. No one gives me enough recognition, etc. Of course I sin, God. What do you expect from me? All the Torah is asking is for us to do that on behalf of others as well. If their behavior is questionable, then just at least consider their circumstances like you would your own. So those two foregoing examples are for the purpose of showing just how wildly sensitive, caring, and understanding the Torah is and teaches us to be. It is important to note that, because if it seems in other instances that the Torah is offending our modern sensibilities, then we're required to question those sensibilities, not the Torah. When you see the sensitivity of the Torah, that was unheard of 3,000 years ago. Nobody cared about anybody other than the mighty and the ruling elite. They're the only ones that had rights. Everybody else got trampled. We see not so, says the Torah. The Torah is just the opposite. It's so wildly sensitive. Therefore, when what we consider our modern sensibilities clashing with the sensibilities of the Torah, we need to rethink our thoughts of what sensitivity is. Which brings us to not bearing a grudge. We know the classic case. The classic case of not bearing a grudge is Reuven asks Shimon to borrow his lawnmower. It's always lawnmower or clippers, I don't know why. To borrow his lawnmower, and Shimon says no. Next day, Shimon comes to Reuven and says, can I borrow your blender? That's my chiddush. Can I borrow your blender? And he said, are you kidding me? I'm going to lend you my blender when you didn't lend me your lawnmower? No. What's amazing and surprising is that when Reuven says no, and his motivation is because Shimon did not lend it to him, then he becomes worse than Shimon. Shimon only transgresses v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that you have to love someone like yourself. You have to lend them your thing if they need it. Reuben transgresses that, as well as the negative command of not taking revenge. Why is that? Why is that fair, right? If you look at it, really, Reuben and Shimon seems like the worst guy, right? Shimon, with no reason whatsoever, just says no. Reuben, at least he's saying no. If Shimon had said yes, I believe Reuben would have said yes as well. Reuben's only saying no because Shimon was so stingy, yet Reuben turns out to be a worse guy than Shimon. Why is that? That's not fair. So Rabbi Yochanan Zweig, brings up this issue, and he says, after all, on the face of it, Reuben seems perfectly justified in refusing to lend his, he uses clippers, so okay, he's refusing to lend his clippers to Shimon. Why shouldn't he treat him the same way and let Shimon learn how painful it feels to be refused? In fact, Reuben can even feel justified in that he is teaching Shimon a lesson in how to treat a fellow Jew. Why is Reuben now subject to an additional transgression? Reuben gets an additional transgression for exactly this reason. In his mind, Reuben is justifying why it is right to do a wrong thing. Shimon is at worst an unkind person. On the other hand, Reuben is feeling justified in his mistreatment of Shimon. He is making his refusal to Shimon a mitzvah. He's justifying a wrong, and justifying a wrong is more severe than missing an opportunity to do something right. In other words, we know, once we get on our horse and we determine we are holy and we are teaching people lessons, oh no, it's not because I don't want to lend it to him, it's not because I'm angry with him, it's because he needs to understand how it feels when people say no. That's very dangerous. That is much more dangerous, because now we are not only convincing ourselves we're not doing something wrong, we are convincing ourselves it's a mitzvah to do that. And so we see we must be careful with our justifications, a topic I speak about often. It's one thing to do something wrong, but totally qualitatively different when we do something wrong and convince ourselves it's the right thing to do. It's a mitzvah. Which brings us to Prince's death. So they had an article, they just had this 1 year, I don't think we call it a yortzeit, but there was something very interesting. It turns out, I read an article about Prince and his, what they call Prince's little known life. He was actually, if you think about it, right, so he was Prince, and then he was the artist formerly known as Prince, and then he came back to Prince, so I guess that made him the artist formerly known as the artist formerly known as Prince. I think that's how it works. Anyway, so he was a Jehovah's Witness. And they talked about his life. He was very humble in that setting. He used to do a lot of good for them, very different and distinct than his public persona. And it says, after he died, they had a private funeral held at Prince's Paisley Park compound in suburban Minneapolis. And then later, after speaking about him, all the elders of his church or whatever, they said he was just a very humble guy, he helped a lot. And then it says, at Prince's congregation, about 80 people gathered Sunday in a plain room with pale yellow walls. Mr. Graham, that was like his priest or whatever, appeared but made no public comment on the musician's death. Meantime, at a nearby club, revelers celebrated Prince's life and music by dancing late into the morning. Very interesting. So we see the ones closest to him, the ones who really loved and cared about him, had a quiet private ceremony at his home and church. All those other people who think they loved him, who wanted to celebrate his life, what did they do? They reveled and danced into the morning. Let me ask you something. Who do those people love and care about? Is it Prince? I don't think so. I think they love themselves. I think they love partying and drinking and reveling into the early morning. And it just so happened that Prince was a good reason to do that. But they don't care about Prince's memory. They're not honoring it by dancing and partying into the night. They're enjoying themselves. And this is an important concept for us to remember. I mention this because, of course, this past week was Yom HaAtzmaut, which is a great day celebrating a modern day miracle. Should be incomparably grateful to Hashem for the blessing He has given us by allowing us to once again return to our homeland. And we should be very happy, and we should celebrate, no question. And we should be extra grateful to Hashem on that day, no question. And I will tell you, I have unassailable Zionist bona fides. My parents bought an apartment in Yerushalayim in 1972, an apartment that we still own to this day. I have been to Israel over 150 times in my life. I do so much business in Israel. I pour tons of money into its economy. My children lived and breathed Israel from the time they were little. But you know what I don't do on Yom HaAtzmaut? I don't listen to music. I don't listen to music because it's the Omer. And I don't party and dance to the music because it's the Omer. I don't try to convince myself it's a mitzvah to disregard those restrictions. Now, I fully understand people in Israel, specifically those who the other 364 days of the year are essentially putting their lives on the line to settle the land, to make the land flourish. So if they get a heter from their Rabbanim that they can listen to music and dance because they feel that it's that day, we could speak another time why it has to be that day, but nonetheless, I understand that. But I can tell you, I don't know what the purpose of us celebrating that here in America with music. What am I doing for Israel by listening to music and eating falafel and shawarma? Is that helping Israel? It's not helping Israel. It's helping my tummy. It's helping the fact that I haven't heard music for a few weeks and I'm aching to hear some. Now that's what it's helping. I don't think it's helping Israel. Now, I understand the beauty and the requirement for us to have pride in our land and for us to celebrate together, undoubtedly and no question. But when we do it at the expense of halacha, some want to call it a binhag, I would say it's settled halacha at this point. And there is only one point in the calendar where everybody agrees in the Omer that no music can be heard. And that is between Rosh Chodesh Iyar and Lag BaOmer. That, no matter what part of Omer you hold, that overlaps right there. And that's the day we chose to have Yom HaAtzmaut. And so I just feel we need to think about that. We need to ask ourselves, who are we more like in that situation? Are we more like the close friends of Prince who are quietly acknowledging, or are we more like those who chose to celebrate his life by partying deep into the night? Of course, people do worse things than this, but when we're starting to get involved again in justifying why we do certain things and calling it a mitzvah, we need to just look at them more closely and more carefully to check and see what is our real reason behind why we're doing that activity. Which brings us to the Torah describing the forbidden relationship between a man and his sister as a chesed. And I ain't making this one up. Look at it for yourself. On page 668, Pasuk 17, it is in the middle of the list of all the different forbidden relationships, and the Pasuk says, V'ish asher yikach es achoso bas aviv o bas imo v'ra'ah es ervasa v'hisireh es ervaso chesed hu v'nechrasu le'nei b'nei amen ervazachoso, etc. A man who shall take his sister, the daughter of his father or the daughter of his mother, and shall see her nakedness, and she shall see his nakedness, it is a disgrace. They say chesed means disgrace. It is a disgrace. And they shall be cut off in the sight of the members of the people. That is as strange of a language as the Torah could use. He is referring to their relationship as a chesed. Now you should know the reason why is because in Aramaic, chesed could be translated as shame or disgrace. That's why it's used there. But it's not accidental that the Torah uses a term that we usually refer to as a kind action. So we've actually talked about this in a different context before in prior classes, but here we're going to focus on something else. There's a reason why it's called chesed. Because all these forbidden relationships are a chesed. They're a chesed to oneself. In other words, you just care about whatever makes you feel good, regardless of permissibility or even detestability. So you are doing a chesed to yourself. You're caring about yourself. I like it, it feels good, that's a chesed. But I want to suggest that Torah uses the word by a forbidden relationship with one's sister, since, in continuing our theme, you could convince yourself, as heinous and repugnant as it is, and even more so in our times, and that is because the Yetzer Hara for incest was removed from us going into the second Beis HaMikdash. It's a story we can talk about another time from the Gemara. That's why we find it so repugnant and detestable. But in ancient times, it was a temptation like any other temptation. But how could you convince yourself it's a chesed, a mitzvah? Because at least in the olden days, where if a woman did not marry, she was most likely doomed to a life of poverty and abuse, since she had no real way to make a living, and she had no protector, and therefore a person could justify he was doing a chesed for his sister by having the forbidden relationship with her, as well as providing her with children who could support her when she was older. The Torah is telling us to beware of such rationalizations. Chesed, you may think it's a kindness, but as it's translated properly, it's a disgrace. And in our society today, where up is down, right is wrong, boys are girls and girls are boys, it's getting harder and harder to distinguish between the two. Good Shabbos.